I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line.
So, as chairman of the select board, I am opposing the so-called Phase 2 pipeline because the people of the town of Cornwall have been very clear in multiple ways that they oppose the pipeline.
There's a cost to the status quo. There's a cost to doing nothing. And don't think for a second that there isn't. Natural gas supports people, it supports the economy, it helps the environment, but it also supports renewables. And in many jurisdictions, what you see is that renewables aren't always readily available.
Well, I think one of the interesting questions is in the environmental side of things that I proposed to Don Gilbert, the president of the company again. His contention is that they're just simply a distribution company, that they don't actually frack themselves. So therefore, he feels that they don't have to deal with that topic at all, which I always felt was pretty lame. And I encouraged him that if he was actually going to be taking and distributing it, that makes him a really good player in the field to call for stronger regulations, and that it really was his duty as the president of the company who was distributing the gas that was fracked to then educate people as to what was going on and be a leader in Vermont calling for better restrictions.
Look out of any window, any morning, any evening, any day.
So what Susan is referring to is a full fuel cycle analysis. It looks at the beginning to the end of the chain, and it looks at, by the way, hydraulic fracturing as well. This is the reason we did it, because there were so many questions about it. And what we found in that process was that even accounting for the hydraulic fracturing processes and techniques that are used, that it is still 23% cleaner than fuel oil. So it is, before we were estimating, I think it was 30 or 32%. So it's 23%. So when you account for fugitive methane or other issues that happen upstream, obviously there's going to be a decrease because we only really have control of our system. But through various analysis, we hired an engineering firm to do an analysis, and it came out very positive. In fact, we had to present that to our regulators under oath, with testimony, and our expert was cross-examined, extensively, and the board pointed out how beneficial this was. And again, there's no such thing as a perfect energy source or a perfect solution, whether it's a road or a power line or broadband line or a gas line. There's always going to be an impact. There are always going to be some compromises that are made. But in Vermont, in particular, we have several layers of regulation, and we're highly regulated to prevent anything bad from happening. So when we look at the environment first, we had engineers that went out and looked at all the rare, endangered and threatened species. We looked at wetlands and sensitive areas, and we documented all those, and then we had to come up with strategies to mitigate or eliminate our impacts to those.
Something happening here.
The state comprehensive energy plan. One of the rationales for the entire undertaking, by which I mean Phase 1 through Phase 3, was that when the governor's current chief of staff, Liz Miller, was head of the Department of Public Service, they put together a comprehensive energy plan for the state of Vermont, much needed, doing all the obvious things, new fuels and getting away from dependence on petroleum products and the like. Part of that, a very small part of that, had alluded to the fact that there was natural gas provided in Chittenden and Franklin County, and that it would be within the plan's purview, in the best interest of the people of Vermont, to have natural gas, an alternative fuel, service extended to the south, down what we loosely call the Western Corridor. So that's enshrined in Montpelier, legislatively approved. The governor, in his first election, expressed concern, when he was campaigning in Rutland, expressed concern that there were estimates that it would take 15 years to get the pipeline from Chittenden County, where it currently terminates, all the way down to Rutland. The people at Vermont Gas, and this gets into questions of who said what and what the meaning was. People at Vermont Gas have told me that they felt a great deal of pressure from the governor's office to move this ahead. So that was working in the background.
So when we look at the Ticonderoga paper mill, for example, they're burning what's called No. 6 fuel oil. It's a very thick, very dirty fuel that is high in particulate contents, high in carbon emissions. And in fact, they've looked at other ways before to reduce their energy costs by burning different and various substances. So when they saw the natural gas coming to them, they saw a way to meet their goals of reducing emissions and also cut costs. That will, again, reduce emissions by about 1 million tons over a 20-year period. It's also a regionally critically important business. There are 600 employees over there. There's another 600 secondary employees in Vermont in the logging industry and in trucking industry and in secondary businesses that help. So economically, it's a real advantage for them, and the paper industry is highly competitive. But the final thing is regional air quality. When we look at regional air quality, many people, I don't know if you all remember, but many years ago, International Paper was looking at experimenting and using tires to burn for fuel, and they called it the tire burn. And what it was found was that it was too dirty and it didn't meet standards. So even at the time they were burning oil, it was determined that because they had so much emissions output, that drifted over to Vermont. So we look at this as not just a local initiative, it's really a regional initiative, it's an economic development, and it's an environmental benefit. So what really drives us is Rutland has been something that we've looked at for many, many years, and we didn't think we could get down there until about 2020. With the international paper agreement that we've signed, and if we can complete the build, again, they contribute $45 million to the construction of the Rutland project. It's infrastructure we wouldn't have to build a second time, essentially, and it gets us there 15 years sooner. Rutland represents, and it's really a very interesting comparison between Rutland County and Addison County. Rutland County, the economics are such that the median family income is $21,000 less than Chittenden or Addison County. Houses go for a fraction of the cost that they would go down there, and it's all reflective of an economy that is struggling to keep its head above water. So by bringing fuel down there, natural gas, we can help them over a 20-year period save over $700 million. And we can help them reduce emissions also by another probably 1/2 to 3/4 of a million tons.
I'm waking up to ash and dust. I wipe my brow and I sweat my rust. I'm breathing in the chemicals.
I think so. I think there was a lot of misunderstanding of the difference between phase 1 and phase 2, and people in Middlebury were getting notices of that people were going to come and survey, and there wasn't a lot of good feedback and information of who they could go to, how they could stop someone from coming on their property, even if they had the rights to stop someone from coming on their property. So there was a lot of misinformation and vagueness that worked in Vermont Gas's favor. I think I was unimpressed when you got down to the real nitty-gritty of could they take over someone's land, how could someone participate, what's the best way for a regular person to participate, those kind of questions is where it got much more vague. The general PR of Vermont Gas was always very effluent and very overwhelming, so I think I think they did dodge a lot of questions. Many questions that I asked in the beginning have still never been answered. And, you know, it's been almost 4 years at this point. So.
There seems to be so much misinformation out there, right? And I think part of that, if we step back for a minute, take Virgins. You know, here's a community that was very interested in natural gas, and yet on the ballot, an item appeared yes or no on natural gas, right? Over 70% of the population in a record turnout voted to support the project, okay? And meanwhile, if you look at media coverage, 70% of the coverage doesn't go to the 70% of the people that supported it, it goes to the opposition and people that, you know, don't necessarily represent the facts the way that scientists do. When we look at safety, safety is our number one job here. We sell a product that if something happens, it could have very bad consequences. Much like electricity, you know, people can get hurt with electricity. Oil, propane, for example, propane isn't even regulated in that sort of an environment. Again, we're heavily regulated by the state and the federal government, and there are different requirements that are code, and so they're codified, and anything from the design of the particular pipe to the techniques that you use to mitigate or reduce corrosion, the testing, the monitoring, and ultimately the pressures and the location proximity of the pipe, those are all built to either meet or exceed code specifications at the state and the federal level.
The sole benefit to Vermonters from a pipeline rammed through Cornwall, Shoreham, and under Lake Champlain is, if the wind is blowing in the right direction, a modest reduction in IP stack emissions.
But when you look at it, it is an incremental step forward on a bridge that will bring us to a cleaner energy future. So when I look at this in its entirety, is it the perfect solution? No. But it's a great solution as we move forward and bridge to an energy future that's mostly renewables.
Right. Well, I think it's the dichotomy that we'll see between phase 1, which is now approved, and phase 2, which has been applied for but not approved yet. And that's the one that will affect most Middlebury properties, that no one really wanted to be the bad guy and say, oh, those big companies shouldn't get economic benefits. But yet, we're going to wind up talking about those properties that are affected a lot more now. I think what you're talking about for Middlebury, how Moncton, how Shoreham, how Cornwall have been affected, is now going to be much more noticeable in the next couple of months for Middlebury. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens and to see how the reaction is it the same or is it different?
I think probably, yeah.